I never imagined that everything I dreamed of could turn into a nightmare so quickly. My name is Pamela, and today I'm going to tell you my story. When I found out I was pregnant, a mixture of fear and joy took over me. I was still trying to believe that John, my husband, would react with enthusiasm, that he would hug me with tears in his eyes, and that we would start a new chapter together. But what I received was silence. A cutting, disconcerting silence. He just nodded, as if I had told him that I had changed the detergent in the sink. That hurt me more than any argument could have. In the days that followed, the situation got worse. John started treating me coldly, criticizing everything. The food I made, the organization of the house, even the way I spoke. That woman who wanted to bring joy to the house became increasingly dull, without space, without spark. I started to feel alone, rejected, as if I were a burden in his life. The pregnancy, which I had so longed to live to the fullest, became a burden in his eyes. And little by little, it also began to weigh on me. John made no effort to hide his contempt. He started bringing home foods with strong smells that made me sick, and he refused to help with anything. I was alone, emotionally and psychologically alone, and I was starting to wonder if this was really the man I wanted to share my life with. As my belly grew, his distance grew. And with that, an uncomfortable suspicion began to grow inside me. Was John involved with someone else? I tried to push that thought away. I wanted to believe in the commitment we had, in the story we had built. But the signs were there. Leaving work late, evasive conversations, a distant look. I wanted to believe it was just a phase. That he was scared of fatherhood, confused by the responsibility. But deep down, something told me there was more. It was one day, while I was washing his clothes, that I found a motel receipt. My body froze at that moment. I stood there, staring at that paper as if it had the power to explode in my hands. My stomach turned. My heart raced. Everything made sense at once. The coldness, the criticism, the disdain for the pregnancy. The confirmation of the betrayal hurt, but it was not a surprise. From that day on, my life became an exhaustive search for evidence. I could not afford to hire a detective, so I took on that role. I searched his pockets, observed his habits. His every behavior was a clue that I tried to decipher. I needed to understand who he was with. Why had he chosen to cheat, precisely at the moment when I needed support the most? But with each frustrated attempt to get something concrete, the humiliation grew inside me. As my pregnancy progressed, I felt increasingly alone. I cried at night, hugging my pillow, wishing it was all a nightmare. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. I already sensed the truth, but I wanted proof. I wanted to free myself from doubt, fear, and the foolish hope that he would return to being the man I knew. It was then that I received a call that would change everything. It was my father, Paul. He had always been distant, too busy with his business abroad to be present in my life. Our relationship was cordial but cold. So when I answered that call and heard his soft voice on the other end of the line saying, "Hi, daughter, how are you?" a lump formed in my throat. There was genuine concern in his tone. For the first time, I felt that he really wanted to know. Before I could answer, he continued, "I'm back in the country. I want to help you. I know things aren't easy." And then came the revelation. I had inherited a considerable fortune from my grandmother. He had been managing this money for years, waiting for the right moment to tell me. That was like a ray of light piercing the darkness I was living in. It wasn't just about the money. It was about support, about family. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't completely alone in the world. That call from my father affected me in a way I hadn't expected. Paul had always been an absent man, too busy with business, traveling, commitments. I grew up with the feeling that he had other priorities and that I was just a reminder of a phase of his life that he wanted to leave behind. So, hearing that he was back and wanted to help me, it was like seeing a door slowly open after years of being locked. A few days later, he came to visit me. When I saw him at the door of the apartment, holding a bouquet of flowers and with tears in his eyes, I almost didn't recognize that man. Not the distant father, but the potential grandfather, the remorseful man who saw in me the daughter he had neglected. We sat down to talk, and for the first time, I allowed myself to cry without fear. I told him about John's coldness, about my loneliness, my pregnancy, and the pain of discovering that the man I loved was cheating on me. Paul listened to everything in silence, respectfully, and when I finished, he took my hands firmly and said, "You don't have to go through this anymore. You're not alone." It was as if the ground had fallen back under my feet. That unexpected support made me feel less broken, less invisible. It was as if I finally had a foundation to start over. The inheritance he mentioned was not small. My grandmother, whom I barely knew, had left me a generous sum of money in a trust that he managed carefully. He confessed that he regretted not having been more present, and that he wanted to help me use that resource to rebuild myself. The inheritance came to represent more than financial security. It was a second chance. An opportunity to leave an unhappy marriage with dignity, to raise my son in peace, to have a real fresh start. With this new perspective, I began to plan my exit. I no longer wanted to live trapped in that cycle of humiliation, lies, and loneliness. John had become a stranger to me. His disinterest was obvious, his contempt suffocating. And now, with my father's support and the security of my inheritance, I had a real choice. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control of my life. I spent days reflecting, strengthening myself, talking to my father. He encouraged me, but never pressured me. He told me that I should leave only when I was ready. And then, one night, sitting at the dinner table, I knew it was time. I prepared the food with trembling hands. When John arrived, he didn't even look me in the eye. He sat down, ate in silence, and, as usual, complained about the food. That was the last straw. I took a deep breath, got up from my chair calmly, and said in a firm voice, "I want a divorce." He stopped chewing. He looked at me as if I had said the most absurd thing in the world. "What do you want?" he asked, trying to maintain a superior tone, but I could hear the tremor in his voice. "Divorce. I've already spoken to a lawyer. These are the papers." I placed the documents on the table. "You spent months treating me as if I were invisible, cheating on me, despising me. I don't need this." He tried to intimidate me, as he always did. He said that I wouldn't survive without him, that I was dependent, weak. But something in me had changed. I was no longer that frightened woman. I looked him in the eye with a calmness that disarmed him. "You're wrong. I can and I will manage on my own." Given my firm tone, perhaps for the first time, John understood that I wasn't bluffing. In silence, he signed the papers. The scene was cold, painful, but liberating. The next day, with my father's help, I left that apartment. I returned to my parents' house, where I finally felt protected. The feeling of security was strange, but welcoming. I slept for the first time in months without fear or anxiety. Henry had not yet been born, but he already inspired me with courage. I wanted to be the mother he deserved. And to do that, I needed to cut, once and for all, the chains that bound me to John. He tried to get in touch in the following days. Calls, messages. But I ignored him. I knew that any conversation would be an emotional trap. I had already freed myself, and I was not willing to look back. I closed that door firmly. I left behind not only a failed marriage, but a version of myself that had accepted so little for so long. Now it was time to rebuild. For myself. And for Henry. In the first months after the divorce, I experienced a kind of peace that I didn't even know existed. It was silent, light, and little by little it filled the spaces where I had previously been afraid. At my parents' house, I slept peacefully again, without the weight of an indifferent presence at my side. The mornings had a different flavor. And despite all the challenges that would come with motherhood, I felt whole. For the first time in a long time, I was all alone. My father's support was essential. Paul didn't try to make up for the past with empty promises, but with his presence, listening, and action. He accompanied me to medical appointments, helped me reorganize my routine, renovated a room in the house so that Henry and I could have a space of our own. And it was in this nest of reconstruction that my son came into the world. Henry was born on a calm morning, surrounded by love. When I held him in my arms for the first time, I understood what a new beginning meant. It was as if everything that hurt, everything that wounded, Everything that tore me apart had served to lead me to that moment. He was small, fragile, and at the same time so powerful. He gave me a purpose greater than any pain. He gave me a daily reason to resist. While I was reorganizing myself emotionally and gradually learning to be a mother, a new twist arrived without warning. I received a message from John. Yes, him. As if the past wanted to knock on the door, testing whether I had truly freed myself. The message was direct, almost accusatory. Why didn't you ever tell me about your family's inheritance? It took me a few minutes to process it. I later found out that a news article had been published on a business website, highlighting the growth of my father's company and our family's wealth. And of course, John didn't waste any time. His interest wasn't in me or Henry, it was in what he could get out of the situation. I responded with the same calmness I had used the day I filed for divorce. This inheritance is exclusively mine. It is not part of the divorce. John didn't accept it easily. He argued that he had rights, that I had hidden information, that I deserved a share of the money. I stared at that message for a few seconds, remembering everything I had experienced with him. The coldness, the betrayals, his absence during my pregnancy. And I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness. Just indifference. I replied firmly, "Remember your betrayal, the way you treated me, how you disappeared when I needed you most. You have no right to anything that is mine." He tried to intimidate me, as he always did. But that Pamela was no more. The woman who bowed to fear and guilt was in the past. I was a mother, I was free. I had a new life, a new sense of worth, and John was just a distant echo. I blocked his number, calmly closed that door, certain that this time it would never be opened again. While he faced financial problems and immersed himself in his own choices, I was building something new, solid, my own. Over time, I became interested in my professional life again. My father made me an offer to work alongside him in the family business. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to hide behind his surname or depend on anyone again. But Paul made it clear that he saw me as a capable woman, not as someone who needed favors. "I want you to grow here. Not as my daughter, but as the professional that you are." I accepted the challenge. Returning to the corporate world was scary at first. I was insecure, having been out of the market for some time, and now I divided my days between diapers, reports, and sleepless nights. But there was something invigorating in knowing that I was building something with purpose. And most importantly, with freedom. The company began to transform me. I rediscovered talents that had been dormant. Ideas that had previously been silenced by insecurities began to gain ground. And I realized that, in addition to being a mother, I was also a creator, an entrepreneur, and a leader. Seeing Henry grow up in a safe environment, with love and stability, was all I needed to know that I was on the right path. He smiled with his eyes, laughed easily, and hugged me as if he were my anchor. Everything about him reminded me of how worth it was to resist. Paul's presence also surprised me every day. He wasn't perfect, nor did he intend to make up for the lost years. But he was there. In the small gestures, in the care for his grandson, in the respect for my decisions. Life was showing me that sometimes bonds can be remade. Not in the way we expected, but in the way we need. And then, one night, as I was putting Henry to bed, I looked out the window and realized that, even with all the scars, I was at peace. The journey had not been easy, and it still wasn't. But now, at least, it was mine. That night when I watched Henry sleep in peace, I realized that what had once been just survival had become a full life. I still carried scars, but now they were war medals, proof that I had survived a storm that almost took me whole. But I knew that to truly move on, I needed to finally close the last unresolved chapter of my story with John. And fate once again tested me. One morning, while I was reviewing reports at the office, I received a notification on my cell phone. It was a new message from him. I ignored it. A few hours later, another one. And then a call. I didn't want to make room for him. But part of me, the part that needed to close this cycle once and for all, knew that it might be necessary to hear what he had to say. I answered with a firm heart. He sounded different. Tired, more restrained. "Pamela, I wanted to say that I regret everything, what I did to you, what I didn't do, Henry. I was an idiot. There was a long silence. I felt something tighten inside my chest, but it wasn't sadness. It was an old regret finally coming undone. John, I don't hate you, but you're no longer part of my life. You chose not to be present, and I chose to survive without you. Today, what guides me is what I'm building with our son, and honestly, that's all that matters. On the other side, he tried to justify himself to get emotional, but none of that changed the facts. The wound had healed, and hearing that apology, however belated it was, only sealed something I already knew. It was in the past. In the days that followed, I felt an unexpected lightness. Having ended that conversation was like lifting an invisible weight that I was carrying on my chest. And in that space that opened up, something new began to blossom. At the company, my involvement grew. I took on a new project focused on social impact, and I was able to use my story as inspiration to support women in situations of emotional vulnerability. I created an internal psychological support program for employees who were in abusive relationships or who were starting over. And there, sharing and listening to stories, I realized how much pain can be a seed. It was during this project that I met Lewis. He was an external consultant, responsible for the strategic side. He had a calm gaze, a generous ear, and an empathy that disarmed me. At first, our relationship was strictly professional, but little by little, the coffees turned into long conversations, and the conversations, deep connections. He knew my story. He never showed pity, only respect. And this was so new to me, so different from what I was used to, that it scared me. For months I resisted. I thought that love was dangerous, that giving in again would be synonymous with opening up gaps for pain. But Lewis never rushed anything. He waited, and I needed time. It was on a normal afternoon, while we were walking through a park after an external meeting, that he calmly told me, "Pamela, I don't want to be someone who saves you. I want to walk by your side if you'll let me." At that moment, I knew that he wasn't coming to fix me, he was coming to add to my life. And for the first time, I considered that perhaps it was possible to love without fear. Not a fairy tale love, but a real, light love, built slowly with care. I introduced Lewis to Henry little by little. And when I saw the two of them on the living room floor, building blocks, laughing at a silly joke, I felt something different. It was as if that space that always seemed missing, that void that John left, was being filled with a true presence. Lewis wasn't trying to be a father. He was a friend, a safe haven, an example of affection. My father also welcomed him naturally. They respected each other. They talked at length about work, travel, and football. Seeing Paul open up to this new phase in my life was yet another sign that, little by little, our family's wounds were healing. But despite the calm that was taking hold, I knew that there was still one last reckoning to be had with the past, and it came unexpectedly. I received the news that John was hospitalized. Nothing serious, but enough to make him rethink some of his choices. He asked to see me. My first reaction was to say no, but something inside me told me that this moment wasn't about him. It was about me, about finally putting an end to everything that had hurt me one day. I decided to go. I arrived at the hospital without much expectation. He was thinner, with a downcast look. When he saw me, he smiled with a mixture of surprise and embarrassment. "I didn't expect you to come," he said. And I simply replied, "I didn't come for you, I came for me." In the following minutes, he cried, saying he regretted not having been a father, of having lost me. He asked for forgiveness again. And this time, I was able to look at him with compassion. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to be at peace. I left with a peaceful heart. I had made peace with my story, and when I got home, with Henry waiting for me at the door and Lewis in the kitchen making coffee, I was sure I had won. After that last conversation with John in the hospital, something inside me finally calmed down. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense. I didn't forget what happened, nor did I justify it. But it was a relief that only comes when we decide that we will no longer carry the burden that is not ours. From that moment on, my life took on a different rhythm. A rhythm of true reconstruction. Henry grew up quickly, full of energy and sweetness. Every little bit of progress he made was a victory for me too. Seeing the sparkle in his eyes when he saw me coming home from work, or when I helped him with his schoolwork, was the greatest confirmation that everything I had faced was worth it. He was my strength, my daily reminder that love can be safe, light, and constant. At the company, my role was consolidated. I earned the respect of the team and took on responsibilities that would have seemed impossible to me before. I worked side by side with my father, and our relationship was also transformed. He stopped being just the austere and absent man of the past to become a partner, a mentor, and, most importantly, a present grandfather. Henry adored him, and seeing my father disarm himself with that boy was almost magical. It was as if the generations were healing each other. Louis, in turn, became a natural part of our routine. He didn't force space. He built his presence with small gestures, with consistency. When I doubted myself, he reminded me of how much I had already overcome. When I was afraid, he would hold my hand without pulling me. It was a mature, patient, calm love, so different from anything I had experienced before that sometimes I thought it wasn't real. But it was. And it was in this scenario of reconstruction, where everything seemed to finally be getting back on track, that I received a call that broke me inside. John had passed away. Although the last conversation had brought some kind of closure, the news paralyzed me. Not because of love or longing, but because of everything that could have been different and wasn't. He left without seeing Henry grow up, without experiencing the privilege of being a father, and even though the pain wasn't mine, the mourning was. I didn't cry for him. I cried for myself, for Henry, for everything we had faced. I cried because his death definitively sealed the end of a cycle that had shaped me, broken me, but also strengthened me. The day after the funeral, I found an audio message from him on my cell phone, sent a few days before he passed away. The weak but sincere voice. Pamela, I know I don't deserve much, but I wanted you to know that I admire the woman you've become. Strong, determined, an incredible mother. You won even without me, or maybe because of that. Thank you for being the good part of my life, even when I was the worst part of yours. Hearing that was like closing the last door. Not with resentment, but with compassion, and at that moment, I was sure that my story, however difficult it may have been, brought me here. Strong, free, whole. Today, I look back on my journey with pride. I transformed pain into strength, abandonment into presence, fear into courage. I created a home where there used to be silence. I rebuilt bonds with my father, rediscovered true love, and most importantly, I rediscovered myself. My past doesn't define me, but it taught me. It showed me what I'm made of. And even if life tests me again, and it will, I know that now I have deep roots and firm wings. The story with John was a dark chapter, but it is no longer the whole book. It is just part of what made me who I am. And now, with Henry by my side, with Louis sharing my days, and with the legacy I am building professionally, I am certain that the best is yet to come. Today, I am a mother, a daughter, a woman. But, above all, I am free. And I promise myself that I will never again sacrifice this freedom for anything. Not for love, not for fear. Because now I know, the love that is worth it is the one that frees us, not the one that holds us back. And it is with this love for myself, for my son, for life, that I move forward with my head held high, with a light soul, with a whole heart,